What a terrific turnout amid difficult conditions. It's just such a delight to see this group reconvening. This is a segment that was an innovation to the Flagship conference, I think about 3 or so years ago. How many? 7 years? You stay at a place long enough, sometimes you lose track of time. It's in a grand tradition, and I want to say a thank you in absentia to J.P. DeVries, who is longtime Silicon Flatirons collaborator here and was one of the instigators of this format, along with Paul. Have you participated in every one of the debates over the years as well? It also is in the spirit of one of my favorite lines about Silicon Flatirons. Bob McKenzie, who many of you know, a friend of Silicon Flatirons, longtime business person in the world of communications, said, "Brad, I don't always understand what's being said up on those panels, but I always understand a good fight." And we are here to see potentially a good fight. I'll briefly introduce our panelists. Presiding over the debate is the Honorable Andy Hartman, District Judge here in Colorado. Andy, before stepping onto the bench, I should say Judge Hartman formally, before stepping onto the bench, for years and years taught copyright law, did a terrific job here as an adjunct professor at CU, and also helped stand up our experiential learning program. Coming out of sabbatical for this occasion, in the side to my immediate left is Casey Fiesler, who is an associate professor in information sciences, also has a sneaky JD in her background from Vanderbilt. And to her left, also on the side, is Luis Villa, who is the co-founder and general counsel of Tidelift. On the other side of Judge Hartman, to his left, is Paul Ohm, longtime friend of Silicon Flatirons, professor of law at Georgetown University, as well as chief data officer these days. And to Paul's left is my colleague, Blake Reid, who is associate professor here and also the director of our Platforms Initiative. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Judge Hartman. Your Honor.
All right, thanks, folks, and thanks for coming back after the break. So as usual, I am by far the least informed of the lawyers on this panel, and that's par for the course. So we basically have a proposal that this side of the table is going to advocate, propose the most powerful generative AI models should, by law, be compelled to be open. Now, I asked that question to Bard, like Professor Vivek did before, and it said, I'm sorry, Andy, I'm afraid I can't do that. But I know that these guys can. So the format here is we have 50 minutes. I won't talk too much. Before we start with the debate, it's going to be an Oxford-style debate, we're going to put a voting survey up, and you'll have to download the QR code or use the URL. And you are going to vote as to whether you are for the proposal, so basically open, or against the proposal, closed, just to make it simple. Then we will have the proponents of the proposal, Lewis and Casey, make opening statements. Then the opponents. Then we'll get into a Q&A session, and then we'll have follow-up. And then when we're all done, we're going to take another vote and see how much the proponents moved the needle or lost the thread, however you look at it. So I know that the people have a lot of things to say. I won't continue to talk. So I think we can put the slide up. We've got this one. Oh, we got the slide up here. So make sure you... You want to talk about it? Oh, do I want to talk about open? All right. Thank you, Professor. Just like the lawyers in my courtroom. So really,
all the lawyers have to laugh at your jokes too.
That's true. That's true. So really, is the definition that we're using of open, and there's a lot of ways to slice and dice this, is can the public have enough to build new models without permission of the owner? So does the public have the ability to approach, to not have to approach the incumbent interests to build a new model? Also, we want to have reproducibility and transparency benefits with this open system. So when you have the fake Joe Biden doing robocalls, and we're just getting used to robocalls, or the fake Taylor Swift on X, and we're just getting used to X, should there be some transparency? And then we are putting some caveats into open, which is the use of the underlying data only to the extent permitted. So I know there were some concerns about privacy. There's obviously copyright concerns. So that's our definition of open. Now, the opponents have a position that they're going to take, and we decided as a group not to focus on a particular opponent position because there are different ways to oppose this. I think I got that, Professor. So now we go to the voting. So we'll take a couple minutes, click on this QR code or use the URL, and we'll do some real-time voting.
It'll go, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, wow.
Wow. All right.
Did not expect that.
No, we were.
Wow.
So this is going to be a real teachable moment because we're basically split even, Stephen.
Wow.
Certainly within the range of any error. Thank you, Nate. And Kaden is going to be keeping time for us. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Lewis and Casey. They'll have 3 minutes each. Oh, okay. So I'm sorry, Lewis.
We're ready?
Then Paul.
All right. Everyone on this stage is agreed that society as a whole, through public organs like the government, the media, and academic research, must regulate generative LLMs. If this truly is the most dangerous technology since the nuclear bomb, it should be answerable to the people, not to a clique of CEOs like OpenAI's and Facebook's whose CEOs don't even answer to their own boards. So what today's debate is really about then is how to regulate. Casey and I propose to you that generative LLMs cannot be effectively regulated if they are a black box, controlled by a small clique. To regulate, the simple first step, but not our only step, must be to pry open those black boxes. Before going further, 2 quick facts that may not be evident, but I'll admit the poll gives me a pleasant surprise there. The first key fact and the good news is that open does not mean anarchy. Open communities have long voluntarily complied with the law. For example, Mozilla and the major versions of Linux have complied with US and patent export control regulations for multiple decades now. On the flip side, when the law is broken, open is not a magic inoculation and not a get out of jail free card. Open source developers can and have been jailed, unlike big tech, which shrugs off billion-dollar fines. This has been most visible recently in blockchain, where a number of developers have gone to jail for publishing open code that enabled illegal behaviors. But certainly we expect we'll see that some more in the deepfakes cases too. So arguing for open is not arguing for lawlessness, it's arguing for giving communities and states the knowledge necessary to regulate. Second, fully open state-of-the-art LLMs are not hypothetical. Mistral from France, Falcon from the UAE, and Eleutheri from a global band of researchers are amongst the many different alternatives. Because open LLMs are going to be a reality, society is going to have to develop techniques and approaches to monitor and regulate open LLMs, whether or not commercial LLMs are opened as we propose. So open is coming. It's not anarchy. What's the positive case here? We think there's 2 significant reasons. First, quite simply, the most effective form of regulation is strong competition. And in tech, open is the best way to get strong competition. Our giants are least well behaved where they face the least open competition in spaces like search and social. The spaces where they are best behaved are the most open. That's true in web browsers, servers, and even mobile, where the most dominant provider has 20%. In LLMs, we can choose between these futures, more like search, where Google closed has 92% of the market, or spaces like web hosting, where the biggest powers have 40%. The other thing is that regulation relies on knowledge. There's a reason when you talk to them privately, so many Silicon Valley leaders genuinely loathe the press. It's because they don't like scrutiny. Open must be the basis for that next wave of regulation. And with that, we will hear more about that from Casey.
Well, I think, thank you, Mr. B. I think we'll now hear from Professor Ohm, and then we'll go to Casey.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be part of one of these again. The only thing I've ever wanted from one of these debates is a moderator who can hold people in contempt and put them in prison. And so maybe this year we'll finally have a fair debate. If you remember only one thing about this debate, our side wants to protect Taylor Swift. Their side wants to expose Taylor Swift to unbridled harm. That's it. So when we ask you to vote at the end, you can ignore the rest. Do you want to protect Taylor Swift or do you not? But to be clean and fair, because that's who I am, we really don't know what AI tool these trolls were using when they created deep fake pornography of Taylor Swift. We don't know if they were using an open model or not. We don't even know if they were using one of the most powerful generative AI models or not. But everyone seems to agree that whatever the baseline harm of deep fake videos are right now, it's about to get much, much worse. And Dean Innes, at the start of the day, reminded us that we are talking about elections and the fate of our democracy. So my argument for our side comes in two steps. One, the advent of generative AI will lead to an explosion in undesirable harms. Two, if we force these models to be open, that will be a dramatic and terrible multiplier of the harms. It'll be a shift from really difficult to tamp down to essentially impossible. So let me say a minute or two about each of those steps. So number one, I really do want you to focus on the kind of full sweep and panoply of harms that we're talking about. Deepfakes are one example, and I don't see her in the room, but I'm thrilled that my friend and colleague Danielle Citron will be here tomorrow to talk about deepfake harms, to talk about the harassment and toxicity that have occurred on platforms, technological platforms over the years. These are all likely to get much, much worse with the kind of false multiplier effect of generative AI models. But it's not just the disproportionate impact on people online. It's also misinformation, fueling conspiracy theories. It's other forms of toxicity. We've already heard about the massive fraud where your favorite celebrity is trying to sell you a pan or get you to vote on the wrong day using generative AI techniques. We're talking about labor displacement. We're talking about copyright. I do want to have a caveat, though, because again, I'm reasonable and fair, if nothing else. I actually am a big believer in the power of this technology to do a lot of good, to generate tons of benefits, and honestly, if I may say so, to bring joy to our lives. And so I am the last person in the world who wants to kind of tamp down on those benefits on the upside of generative AI. But I am not sanguine at all about our ability to tamp down these harms. Even in a non-open environment, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take the concerted effort of people like us in this room and other people of goodwill. But the worst thing we can do is encourage an unregulated trade in these weapons of math destruction, with apologies to Kathy O'Neill. Okay, with that, I see the rest of my time. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Professor. Now we'll turn to Professor Fiesler.
So I should start by saying that I'm basically a computer scientist these days, so I haven't argued with anyone since law school. But I'm going to have to point out that the Taylor Swift deepfakes came from Microsoft. An interesting thing here is that it's not as if Luis pointed out, the people who are contributing to and building open source are not accountable to the law and to professional ethics in the exact same way that big tech is. The same way. Big tech is particularly good at skirting these kinds of things. And so sometimes accountability can only be forced by certain types of transparency. And I'm sure we're going to see some big whistleblower someday, but in the meantime, we have these black boxes inside black boxes, and one way to pry them open is through the transparency that is forced by openness. And part of this means so that researchers and third parties can inspect the underlying code, which means that they can find things like the sources of bias and privacy harms, security vulnerabilities, exactly the kinds of things that we're talking about are these harms that are already existing in the models that we have now and that are totally closed. So this allows us to deal with these kinds of harms by real audits and serious threat modeling that might include things like red teaming. But it's very hard to do these things from the outside right now. We've been having this conversation with respect to social media platforms, particularly Facebook, for years. There are all of these benefits of allowing third-party researchers to examine the impact of technologies that are really impacting our lives. I'm a social computing researcher. There is some amazing research out there about Facebook that includes these huge data sets. but it's coming from researchers who work at these big companies. So, a few years ago, the ethical AI team at Twitter, rest in peace, published, both to the ethical AI team and to Twitter, published a paper with a bias audit of their image cropping algorithm. And this was really shocking because we don't tend to see published research where the outcome is like my bad. And you may recall that the stochastic parrots paper was part of what got Timney Gebru fired from Google, and that was very critical of LLMs. So you might say like, oh, well, you don't need open red teaming, or like you can get open red teaming, like what happened at DEF CON, but there's only certain kinds of access that you can get, and the more diversity of people we have able to look for harms is really important. Like maybe if more people had been actively in the room talking about the harm of sexually explicit deepfakes, then Taylor Swift would be in a better position right now. And the more people who are able to inspect the underlying code, the better chance we have there. So I would like to see more community-led growth, and also like opening these black boxes so that more people have the ability to inspect these kinds of harms.
Thank you, Professor. You probably tear it up at those computer science meetings. And now, lastly, Professor Reid.
Thanks, Your Honor. Well, I respect and agree with Paul's unimpeachable take that a vote for us is a vote for Taylor Swift. Even he has been far too optimistic about the benefits and not worried enough about the terrible harms of AI openness. And the first harm of AI openness is that it's going to make AI all but impossible to regulate. In the absence of openness, we have a small handful of AI platforms whom we have at least some marginal hope enforcers might be able to keep under control. But in a world where models and data are widely available to anyone at the click of a button, the number of regulatory targets will swell by many orders of magnitude. Lewis says that openness won't be anarchy, and that's because the world of Mad Max is positively civilized relative to what enforcers will face with the insurmountable task of managing an endless array of malevolent actors, from anonymous trolls targeting marginalized communities with organized harassment to hostile nation states set on disrupting our elections. And platforms purporting to embrace openness are simply Goliaths trying to surround themselves with sympathetic Davids, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and researchers to avoid regulation. They are cynically substituting the toxic political economy of big tech for the faux mom and apple pie Americana schmaltz of innovation and small business. As Paul illustrates, we've got to control the platforms to impose some modest degree of accountability and responsibility. But controlling and managing openness will require the expenditure of vast legal and political capital to address a task that's so complex that the ensuing capture of regulators will make Ma Bell era AT&T blush, and even small mistakes in implementation will put these new quote-unquote innovators, scare quotes on purpose, in the thrall of big tech companies recreating the problematic gatekeeper situation that we have now. And speaking of AT&T, even Ma Bell era AT&T was far more beneficial to society than anything the AI companies have put on the table. They brought us ubiquitous point-to-point communication between every American. Now, Paul says AI brings joy, and he's right. General purpose generative AI is a glorified children's toy, doing little more than fulfilling the childish fantasies of middle-aged Americans, no offense, Paul, who are so excited about finally talking to a robot that they don't care if it buries the internet in an avalanche of garbage and lies and deepfakes. And we've got no reason to believe that innovation is going to result in more improvements here. The people in control of funneling capital into this ecosystems have given us self-driving cars that can't, $400 juice box presses, overt Ponzi schemes disguised as decentralized finance, and worthless pictures of cartoon monkeys. If you'd like to go to CES this year, you can try out the $4,700 pair of AI binoculars that will help you identify birds. And really, the only real barrier to competition that openness overcomes is access to large troves of ill-gotten, pirated works and personal data. So in conclusion, we should forget about about mandating and regulating and managing the mess of openness and spend our political capital on regulation to stymie these manifest harms before it is too late.
Thank you, Professor. You make all your professors proud. All right, so because this side has the burden of proof, Mr. Villa, you can ask the first question to the opponents.
Blake, since we're going to be so effective at regulating these big tech harms, can you remind me what penalty Adobe paid for enabling deepfakes with Photoshop for the past 20 years? And can you remind me what harms Facebook faced for enabling genocide in Myanmar?
Louis, I couldn't agree more that we haven't gone far enough with regulation. And indeed, I think we've spent the last 25 years under-regulating the very kinds of companies that you're talking about. And I think now is the time to start.
Thank you. Professor Ohm?
This is spurred by Casey's wonderful opening, but it can go to either of you, which is Casey raised the specter of these hardworking, industrious, and good-hearted researchers who are using these open models, right, to find things about. But I want to know how we distinguish these people from the fraudsters and the deep fake, creators that we're talking about in an open world, when anyone can download the model and run it on their laptop. How do we keep the good and the bad from getting access to the technology?
I mean, I can answer you with a historical analogy, which is to say that just like the printing press, we let these things be sorted out after the fact, right? What you're essentially proposing is proactive censorship and control of a level that would be pretty unprecedented in a democracy. To do the kind of, because these open models are going to be out there whether or not we compel the top models to be open or not. So if the bogeyman you're raising is all of open, the solution is going to have to be for the real middle-aged folks here, clipper chip. Anybody remember that? That's what the kind of solution that is going to be required to stop open.
All right, thank you, sir. Professor Fiesler?
Yeah, and so since part of my response to that was going to be how are you distinguishing between the good and the bad actors now in these closed systems? And so my question is, what is the thing that bad actors can do with an open source AI that they can't do with current closed AIs? And I would remind you that the troll in his basement who made the Taylor Swift deepfakes was using Microsoft.
No, I get it, and I'm not here to say that every closed system is well run and well regulated. So what we need all of us, and I don't just mean big government, but I mean all of us working with these companies to do a better job with their closed systems. But the closed system gives them a fight in the game, an opportunity to do something. I'm gonna do something really risky in a debate and say something nice about OpenAI, right? Although they are an evil and large and suspicious company, they have a track record of being worried for cynical, financial reasons and for regulatory reasons with bad things happening on their network. And because they have not made the decision to open their model, they have an opportunity to change the filters, to fine tune the model, to do all sorts of things to bring human alignment to their system.
Thank you. Professor Reid?
So a question for the whole team, but for Casey. So Casey, you talked about the importance of researcher access, and I wonder, is researcher access to these models an end unto itself? And if so, what are the benefits that justify the vast complexity of ensuring that it exists? And if it's only a means to other ends, what are those other ends?
I might not be completely understanding your question, but I mean, I think the obvious benefit to researcher access is being able to find these problems in ways that the companies are not incentivized to do, right? Like again, where I rarely see research papers from big tech companies that have a bad outcome. Right? Like, we did an audit of our system, and we'll see the results if it was amazing, but very rarely if it turns out that it's really bad. And so that's part of the argument. And it's not just about researchers. It's also about having more people able to critique these systems.
I'd also add real quick, if I can, we already know that it's not just adversarial research, it's also research to deploy these things in minoritized languages, minoritized cultures. If you look at the languages that the big models support, it's all the languages that you would expect. If you look at model languages that other more open models support, it's because local groups have done that work in their language. And that's only possible because of open.
All right, thank you, Mr. Villa. Back to you. Question for the opponents.
Oh, for me. So, Paul, you set yourself up for OpenAI being so concerned. What do you take, they recently, their board said, we are concerned about what this is doing for the future of humanity. And the response of their investors, even though they're a California nonprofit, and the response of their staff was to say, no, we think we're fine. What do you have to say to that question?
I mean, to put it on the record clearly, I have nothing but like utter disdain for almost everything that company has done, right? And so my point here isn't that, they are the model of how we want this to unfold. My point is even the worst actors are in the game. Even the worst actors can be responsive to incentives, right? If there is a kind of terrible capitalists out there doing terrible things, they're still responsive to things like morality and regulation and concerns about things like this. And so what I'd like to say is, hopefully there'll be better companies. I mean, you've rattled a bunch of company names out, and a lot of them have kind of a moral center and a compass that's better aligned with what I care about than OpenAI. I would like to put them in charge. I'd love for them to get the market share. And in order to do that, it would be nice if there was some gate that they could keep as the gatekeeper.
All right, thank you. Professor Ohm?
To break the fourth wall a little bit, I'm going to ask a question about the thing that we all said, should we really allow that to come into the debate? So since I've been OpenAI's greatest defenders, when I think open release, I mostly think of Meta, a name we've gone this far in the debate without talking about once. We all know that almost everything Meta does is universally beloved and for the common good. But to date, Meta has stood for the kind of loudest, most aggressive advocates of open release, not as fully as we've defined in this debate. And in fact, I think some of the kind of minoritized, country work you've been talking about were based on Meta's Llama model. So why do you love Mark Zuckerberg so much?
Declaration of conflict. I guess I was briefly Facebook's counsel on open issues a disturbingly long time ago. Nevertheless, I'm going to throw Mark Zuckerberg under the bus. I think there's two things to point out here. One, critically, there are lots of critics within Facebook who have told Facebook's leadership repeatedly, this is not open, we should not call it open. And to the point of our question about governance, those voices internally have all been stifled. They have been told that if they disagree, they should leave the company, and that the final decision is Mark's. There's no board, there's no amount of regulation that can force those people to have a voice within the company. So to the question of who actually regulates, who is the clique who controls this stuff within Facebook, it's Mark. So, but the second point is, so this is an open model, Llama, is something I can download, I can play with on my computer. I cannot, for the life of me, find out how it was trained, what data sets it was trained on, and these things matter. Right? This is how we know the true power and the true regulability of a system is how it's trained, because those are the secret sauce, right? If we as a society do not have access to that kind of thing, if Facebook routinely fires whistleblowers who deign to leak information about what that secret sauce is, then we as a society are never going to be able to successfully regulate Mark. It's going to be a constant game of cat and mouse where they always have the upper hand if that information about training data and training processes isn't available to society as a regulatory tool. So yes, they call it open, but until we understand what goes into it, not just the final thing, we as a society are always going to be acting with one hand tied behind our back when it comes to regulation.
All right, thank you, sir. Professor Fiesler.
So do you think that the reasons that you gave, either of you, for like against openness, a lot of focus on harms, for example, the particular harms of open, do you think that's the reason that OpenAI isn't actually open, and that Llama isn't as open as it could be? Are those the reasons?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, by the way, you characterize our site as against openness. We're actually just pro-civilization.
Sorry,
But no, I mean, I think the openness we have today, I mean, some of it is animated by the kind of pro-research goals that you've been talking about, but at least the largest ones and the most famous ones are kind of naked commercial, attempts to become a platform, to steal market share, to lock in kind of the hearts and minds of developers. But I'm here to say that this is sometimes what we call incentive alignment, right? That these capitalistic impulses and our hope to build a better world happen to kind of line up really nicely. And that's the kind of thing I want to harness, right? I mean, yes, we'll suffer some of these capitalists. Hopefully there'll be some with better, value systems. But at the same time, I can work with the evil capitalists as well, because there's at least an opportunity to do some good.
Yeah, and if I could, Your Honor, segue into with an answer to this into my
You'll allow it?
Go ahead.
I'll allow it.
with your indulgence. I actually want to ask the audience a question. So for those of you that are working on tablets and laptops, how many of you have an Apple product open right now? All right, fair amount. How many folks have a Microsoft product? Any Google products? A couple. How many of you are running Linux right now? Oh, so here's the question for you guys. Given the popular uptake of open source models and technology that actually matters for our lives, who's going to be using this stuff?
So how many of you have used a website today that is powered by Linux? This is a trick question, because if you used a website today, the answer is you used Linux. How many of you know that macOS is based on an open source kernel? And in fact, it was the availability of that open source kernel that allowed macOS to become relevant again after it was headed to the dustbin of history. How many of you know that the only major player to take back market share from Microsoft has been Linux on the server and Mozilla on the web browser, right? Like, these are the ways we create competition. I got to admit, in the previous panel, I wanted to jump up and down and say the way you get interoperability is not by writing very long specifications, it's by releasing open source implementations of those specifications. That's how we get interoperability and the competitive benefits. So, does that answer your question, Blake?
All right. All right, thank you everyone for those.
I have one quick bonus question for the other side. Did you know that we're in Colorado and that Taylor Swift is a Kansas City Chiefs fan?
We'll take judicial notice of that. All right, so thank you for that lively discussion. Needless to say, these terrific minds were using hyperbole. They don't necessarily believe what they've said. You can buttonhole them later to see.
I believe she's a Kansas City fan.
Now at this phase, we'll have closings, and then we'll take another vote. Because this side has the burden of proof, they will go last. So Professor Reid, you have about 2.5 minutes.
All right, the gauzy, nebulous, feel-good granola version of openness that Lewis and Casey have advanced as a pipe dream. There's no political economy for the communitarian vision of openness for AI anymore, and then 2024 will be the year of Linux on the desktop or the laptop or the phone, even in its most communitarian form. Openness has really all been about control, from contributors to the Linux kernel to the volunteers, editors of Wikipedia, and AI will be no different. The only difference is that the openness of AI will be intermediated by large, well-capitalized companies who have large financial interests in the performative appearance of openness and in diffusing attention from the harms that their models cause and little interest in cultivating actual openness or taking responsible for the habits havoc that their users will create. And we've seen this movie before with social media platforms. We made the unwise choice to let run amok for the first 25 years of the commercial internet. And as thanks, they've provided a platform for public health misinformation in the worst global pandemic in modern history. They've thwarted collective action on our ever-worsening climate crisis. They've coarsened our discourse. They've harmed the mental health of children and played a key role in global atrocities, including genocide and insurrection. They are even amplifying the obvious harms of nascent AI platforms, allowing deepfakes, lies, and misinformation to spread virtually unchecked. We have the opportunity to take a different path with AI platforms, but that path will be quickly lost to us if their ill-conceived technology sits on every laptop and tablet across the globe. We should abandon pie-in-the-sky dreams of openness and focus on addressing the grim reality of AI as it exists before it's too late. Yield the rest of my time back.
All right, thank you, Professor. Professor Fiesler.
So as a lawyer and an ethicist, I'm used to being the buzzkill in the room. And so I wanted to try to muster up a little bit of optimism to close here. And so I was thinking about what would make me more optimistic about the future of AI. And one of those things is different people building it. And I don't just mean different in the sense that like it would be nice, to see a woman on OpenAI's board, but I also mean that more people contributing to the development of this technology is good. And I don't just mean in the sense of demographics or even life experiences, I mean people with different kinds of goals. So, one thing you might have heard about free and open software before is not free as in beer, free as in speech, but also what about free as in gift? And I do think, that there was a time when AI development was about being a gift to the world, but I'm struggling to see that more today. And so we've mentioned a little bit about competition. And so, I do think that large concentrations of power in general are not great, and that we want to see more developers of AI with different kinds of goals, community-oriented goals, safety-oriented goals, and giving a leg up to smaller AI. And one reason is that smaller, more tailored models are also less energy hungry, because right now it's like we're powering up a supercomputer every time we want to do first grade math homework. And so then the last thing I would add on this point is that Blake is completely right. Like a lot of our big tech companies have done some really, really bad things. And now, these are the same folks that we have in control of this incredibly important technology. And so in the immortal words of Taylor Swift, this is why we can't have nice things. Because you broke them. And so let's, get some more people who aren't going to break as many things.
All right, thank you, Professor. Professor Ohm.
My opponents tout the virtue of the sunlight that openness will bring to the models that are going to become increasingly important to our lives. But sunlight also casts shadows. And what I'm most worried about are those toiling in the shadows to do terrible things with these, people who will be out of reach not only of our enforcement, but even our detection. And so I would like to end on a kind of optimistic note as well about the state of the AI competition scene right now. It feels a little bit like the early days of the web, where we have lots of companies, some giant, some startup, who each have their own kind of pitch for the hearts and minds and wallets of the consumers. And they're taking different paths. They're, forking different trees. And this includes in terms of how much they let other people build and innovate on their platforms. And so although OpenAI is a boogeyman that I have slandered and refused to embrace, they are also deeply committed, again, for cynical capitalistic reasons, to allowing people to fine-tune their model, to create bespoke versions of their model. And there's lots of power that's being unlocked through systems like that. I would expect the Googles and the Metas and other competitors, once they leave this openness pipe dream, to compete in different ways in the amount they empower innovators, to go to places where there aren't OpenAI industries and create new ones. And again, for cynical reasons, but as long as they're working with us and with government, I think better to the end. I want to do the same thing as Casey and end with the words of a poet laureate, Taylor Swift. This is the song Evermore from the album Evermore. and I was catching my breath, staring out an open source window, catching my death. And I couldn't be sure. I had a feeling so peculiar that this pain would be forevermore. Taylor, the pain does not have to be forevermore. You don't need our help. You're a powerful woman, one of the most powerful people in the world. Close that window, Taylor. Don't catch your death. We're behind you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ohm. Mr. V, a last word.
You know, I started this debate by comparing LLMs to nuclear weapons, but I really do believe a different, extremely dangerous technology is a better comparison. We think of printing presses now as relatively safe tools, but they were, for a long time, considered extremely dangerous. They were heavily controlled and censored by king and pope alike. And what those kings and popes got was 100 years of brutal warfare in Europe. And yet, not for nothing, they are the only technology specifically mentioned in the Constitution. Like printing presses, LLMs are going to have massive peacetime uses, and their technology is going to get smaller, cheaper, and more accessible. And I will admit, there's going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to have deep fakes of Professor Ohm hugging Sam Altman, and you know, some things are just going to fall through the cracks. But this moment calls for optimism. Urgent, careful optimism, yes, but not fear. Just as kings and popes feared printing presses, fear will counsel us to give the central role in the next phase of computing to a handful of companies. These are the same handful of companies. Blake lists all the directions that went wrong in the past 25 years in computing, but doesn't mention who did that, right? Professor Ohm sounds like Microsoft in 1999. Linux is going to be the end of the world. Even Microsoft has come to an accommodation. If you went to Bing.com today, which admittedly none of you did, it's powered by Linux on the back end. And Microsoft makes billions of dollars on open source. Urgent optimism will instead, I think, counsel society to legally require openness as the first and but-for step towards effective regulation of the most powerful LLMs. Paul mentions that we're getting fine-tuning, but if I want to fine-tune an LLM from OpenAI, I might want to know things like, hey, how much Nazi propaganda is in your training set? Good luck getting that answer. In fact, they used to make that available, but now they've decided, not so much. Good luck figuring that out, society. Similarly, in my hometown in San Francisco, we have self-driving cars driving around all the time. And they, you know, occasionally run over people. And you know what regulators have been told? Oh, you can't get pictures of that. Oh, I'm sorry. There was bad bandwidth in my video upload. Sorry, you can't see the car crash. That's the current state of the art, and we must do better if we're going to regulate AI. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Let's hear it for the whole panel. All right, folks. So the panelists have agreed to abide by the results of this election. And now you are all the jury. Go to the slides and remember, before the debate, it was 52.5 disagreed and 47.5 agreed. So let's see if there's any movement. So please vote only once.
This is the only time in my life I'm going to feel like Taylor Swift, where you all have cameras pointed up at me at once. Soak it in.
Totally. All right, looks like everyone is voting. Anyone still voting? All right,
If you guys didn't have the anchor past 25 years,
okay, well, now we find out if the pod doors are open or closed. All right, so how did we do?
Oh my God. You're all dead to me.
Well, thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience for participating. We really appreciate it. And I don't know if I should say go Chiefs or go Niners. Thank you.
Go Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift wins.
with Taylor, we're all winners.
One more round of applause. That was terrific.